What's going on? Good to see you. Man, I don't even know where to begin with this. So I started watching NASCAR when I was a kid, specifically in the year 2000. And if you have been following NASCAR for as long as I have, or even before that, you know how tragic the year 2000 was for the sport. And then, of course, in 2001, we lost Dale Earnhardt in Daytona. And those were accidents. Those were racing accidents. Tragic, shocking, all in the same. But when something like this happens for no reason, just out of the blue, just, one day somebody is fine and the next, I was scrolling through Instagram and I saw this black and white photo, and at first I just skipped it, and then I went back and I saw the picture of Kyle Busch and his birth date, the year that he was born, in 2026. And like everyone, you can't make sense of this stuff. I remember when Kyle Busch came into the sport, when he was this very aggressive, very very cocky attitude. But that's where he got his nickname Rowdy Busch from, because he was rowdy. He did things on the track the way he wanted to, that's just who he was. And dominant years at Hendrick Motorsports, dominant years at Joe Gibbs Racing, and later in his career, the last few years, he transitioned to another legendary NASCAR team in Richard Childress Racing. One of the great motorsports, in all of motorsports, drivers that we'll ever see. And he had a few years left. Maybe even more. Maybe he still had a good decade left. But that's not what's important. Both him and his brother Kurt Busch, which Kurt Busch is already in the Hall of Fame. But man, what a devastating, shocking, tragic day for just to be a fan of motorsports and NASCAR. And he has a son that's coming up. I don't know, he's 13 years old. Heck of a racer. His wife You know, they're when I look at when you look at, you know, Kyle Busch and his wife, you know, that's what the kind of you see the kind of life that you aspire to have, and that's, I think, what I saw. My perspective is what I saw with Kyle Busch and his family. This was a man that had everything in his life going for him in his life. And you know, you just never know. You never know. It's just one day you're winning a race, one day everything is great. And then something happens, which, you know, nobody knows exactly at the moment what happened. And again, that's not important. What's important is that we've lost one of the greatest race car drivers that has ever lived. An irreplaceable driver, you know, and just an all-around spectacular person, you know. I hated Kyle Busch, the race car driver. I hated Kyle Busch because he was so dominant. And when you have that level of hate, you know you're good. You know you're good. You're superb. You're a superior, unbeatable race car driver that a lot of race car drivers envy. And because, you know, they spend their whole lives getting to the point where Kyle Busch was able to seemingly naturally have the ability that most race car drivers work effortlessly night and day to obtain, and still never reach the level that Kyle Busch was just born with as a race car driver. You know, I was really pulling for Kyle Busch over the last couple years. You know, he's struggled in the sport, and it was obvious, and it was honestly very difficult to watch someone that was so good, that is so good, that is a champion, that is as good as a race car driver can be, to struggle like that. And I was really pulling for Kyle Busch. And it just, you know, like I've seen a lot of people in the sport, it just, you know, stuff like this doesn't make sense. And then, you know, you think of what Richard Petty said when he lost his grandson Adam Petty in a crash 26 years ago. You know, he said that you never put a question mark where God has put a period. Man, it's just so, it's what a blow, what a devastating, just unreal, man. Just so unreal that this, and that's life, you know. That's just the fragile nature of our existence. And it doesn't matter who you are, what you've accomplished. One day you're here, one day you're gone. But anyway, I don't want to say anything that might not be the right thing to say. I just wanted to share my thoughts and my memories of Kyle Busch. You know, it's and you know, it's only been a few months since Greg Biffle was lost in the airplane, and not to take away anything from Greg Biffle, I don't mean any disrespect when I say this, but you know, Kyle Busch was Earnhardt level. He was Earnhardt level. I'm not comparing, I'm just saying the guy was just phenomenal. So, you know, I don't know who is gonna replace him in that car, and that's not important. But anyway, that's all I want to say. I don't want to go too long with this. So, rest in peace, Kyle. Just thinking about his brother Kurt and his wife and his son. And the entire NASCAR community, because NASCAR is if there's any sport that is a real community, a close community, a family between the drivers and the fans, it's NASCAR. It always has been. So long, Kyle. Thank you for, it's crazy, I'm saying that because when he was racing and dominating and winning all the time, you hate it. But then when that stops, you just wish that driver could get back to where they're able to be at. And just for it to end like this so suddenly and so unexpectedly, it's what could be worse? What could be a worse ending, I say that with respectfully. So have a good one.